So to introduce myself very quickly, I am Gülsin Harman. I'm a Turkish journalist and a press freedom activist, as if I may call myself, based in Istanbul. In 2016, last year, I was the country project coordinator for On the Line project. It is a project initiated by the International Press Institute. It's a press freedom organization based in Vienna, Austria, back in Europe, and with a history of more than 65 years. So On the Line, the project's aim was to look into digital attacks against journalists. And within this project, we tracked down all types of digital attacks against journalists. And we considered online harassment as a number one, not even number one, but one of the top priorities, one of the top obstructions against press freedom in the world. And what we have counted as online harassment, it was verbal abuse, threats of rape and death, and as we will speak about it in a moment, but as you can imagine, for female journalists, threats of rape, it's a very common reality when they face each day on the social media. We have counted smear campaigns, trolling, hacking of private accounts, blocking of independent news websites also as a part of the digital attacks against journalism. Over the course of 9 months, International Press Institute was able to log more than 2,000 cases to the database. And I encourage you strongly to check the database made by IPI. So it took me a year and my colleagues also to look into online harassment in Turkey happening on social media, mostly on Twitter, because in Turkey, Twitter is the most important place to have a political debate. And I've been, with the generous help of my colleagues, I was able to collect some cases of online harassment through their personal emails and through various forms of digital attacks. So what I have learned to 5 takeaways from the online harassment in Turkey. First, I have learned with a great sadness that online harassment is a very effective tool to silence journalists, to intimidate journalists. And in case of Turkey, I'm really saddened and depressed to say that it has achieved its goal. Now, more and more Turkish journalists, when they are using social media to promote their work, they are more and more reluctant to do it because they face really organized smear campaigns, trolling, and some hacking activities going on. And the self-censorship triggered by the online harassment is a very sinister weapon to intimidate journalists. And it's something very hard to fight it on and to combat. And a lot of Turkish journalists and a lot of actually moderate voices went silent on Turkish social media, and we will come back to this later. Social media in Turkey is very crucial, since there's a very persistent crackdown on traditional media news outlets. The social media is one of the, not even one of the, I would say, it's the unique outlet that people have an area to voice their dissidence. And so, for example, there's a history of an independent news media website who gave up to publishing after more than 10 blockings on their website. So with each blocking, they were losing their audience, hence the money, the advertising money that they were getting. And the second lesson that I learned from looking into online harassment in Turkey against journalists, state-sponsored actors or any government-affiliated actors, when they are involved in a targeting of a journalist, the chilling effect is much more stronger. And when it is combined with impunity, when a persistent harasser of a journalist is not getting punished or is not facing any kind of protest, it keeps going and it keeps growing. And in Turkey, we had online harassment coming from the pro-government columnists, some mayors of the big cities, and some government officials. So when a journalist is intimidated by someone directly connected to the government, the chilling effect is much more stronger, and hence the journalist finds it always so hard to do their job. And the third lesson is that female journalists are much more prone to be targeted. And in case of other countries, identity matters. If a journalist is coming from a minority identity or any ethnic identity, religious identity that are minority, that are conceived as minority within the public, they are much more vulnerable to be targeted. And the fourth lesson would be that, and it's a good lesson actually, that in Turkey we have found out that combating online harassment, especially if it's coming from the government actors, government affiliated actors, it's very hard to be combated on, but the support networks and immediate help and immediate response coming from the colleagues help to cope with the situation. And the fifth lesson will be, in my experience, that the social media networks, they have a huge responsibility to monitor the network that they are creating, the network they are offering for public debate. And when a journalist is attacked, and constantly, when a journalist is constantly under attack, the social media platforms have a much more important duty to help the journalist to fight it back. And so, if we go back as another identity that I currently have, I'm a freelance journalist right now in Turkey because last year the project has ended, and currently I'm working for a very renewed and prestigious international news outlet in Turkey, but my name is concealed in the reporting due to security concerns. And these concerns derive from the Turkish government's insistence on perceiving any Turkish citizen working for international media as being disloyal to their nation and to their country. And over the last 5 years, while the press freedom situation in Turkey was deteriorating, I'm still a press freedom activist, and it has learned me also a good deal of lessons that I would like to share with you. And so first and foremost, that being a journalist in a country with jails, according to Amnesty International, currently in Turkey, more than 150 journalists are jailed. And according to International Press Institute, the number is actually close to 170. And Committee to Protect Journalists names Turkey as the top jailer of journalists in the world. So working and being committed to do my journalism work in a country like this taught me that it can be really frustrating. And now we can say that all these 5 lessons that I had, actually it really relates to 5 types of fate a Turkish journalist can have. First, you can be jailed, like a lot of my colleagues currently are. Mostly the charges are terrorism propaganda, helping a terrorist organization without being a member, and in some cases, the journalists are allegedly considered to be directly linked to various terrorist organizations. Turkey is currently under emergency rule. Since the failed coup d'etat in 15th of July 2016, the country is run by an emergency rule when a presidential decree is considered as a law, and a total arbitrary rule is overshadowing Turkey, and we are witnessing the nullification of the rule of law. When someone is jailed, sometimes it takes months to discover why they are jailed, and when they are released, we don't know exactly why they are released. And the second type of fate that Turkish journalists are facing, it's being jobless. So Venice Commission of European Council puts the number of jobless journalists in Turkey, and it is the number from back in April, so I'm sure that it increased. In Turkey now, more than 2,500 journalists are jobless. And with emergency decrees, more than 200 media outlets were shut down overnight. And there is no judicial recourse to renounce this decision since it is done by emergency decrees, and all the judicial appeal processes are locked down against it. And 3, it's self-censorship, and it's the most sinister weapon. Now, more and more, we have less journalists working in newsrooms, but if even they have a chance to do it, more and more they face either direct censorship coming from the publisher, coming from the editor-in-chief, coming from the decision makers within the newsroom, or even there is no necessity for it because they self-censorship themselves so hard, and even I remember myself that 2 years ago I was a foreign news editor for a Turkish newspaper. When I was interviewing someone, I would refrain myself to ask questions that I was so sure that it wouldn't make to the newspaper. So even at the moment of doing the interview, I would not ask some questions. And censorship, like I said, it's a very sinister weapon, and it's very hard to fight back because it becomes a part, an inseparable part of yourself. And as a journalist, it's so hard to overcome and to have a much more open mind to do your job. And the fourth lesson I would say, and this is my case, now we have a small community in Turkey, Turkish citizens working for international news media, but most of the time, and thankfully we are still able to operate because we are working for international media, we are able to work as decent journalists covering news stories, but sometimes we have to stay anonymous, or sometimes we get enormous targeting online harassment, or we are facing investigations for reporting. And the fifth fate can be a decent journalist, a good journalist working for a very few left independent news organization. We have the mainstream media in Turkey, I would say very sadly that doesn't exist anymore. We don't have an independent mainstream media anymore. It has some varying levels of pro-government coverage and very few criticism. And colleagues working for independent news media, they are facing a lot of trials and investigations. So for example, I have a good friend of mine, she has so many trials against her, and she has to appear in all of them. Now she finds it very difficult to appear to appear at the newsroom because she has to go to the courtroom each day. So it's an obstruction against her work also. The most important lesson that I got that I would like to share is like, do not let the political power to normalize things. I would say to object from very beginning to every breach of law, to every single attack on press freedom, because later on it can be too late. And when things start to not look normal, when there's an attack on the institutions and on the democratic culture, I think that I strongly believe that a reaction should come very earlier and very united. So I would say the mistake that maybe a mistake, a flaw, or it can be a major issue of discussion. But as Turkish journalists, we have failed to convince our audience or readers that we exist for them. So I would suggest to always be connected to your audience. The journalism is done for the sake of public. And anti-press rhetoric coming up from a populist leader, from a totalitarian society or autocratic leader should be beaten with a very persistent effort. And I think that as journalists, we should always tell your audience that when a journalist, an institution, a news outlet is under attack, it's your very right to information that is under attack. So when the journalists raise their voices to protect press freedom, it's for our readers, and we should really convince them, and we should really always emphasize that this job, the job that we are doing, the journalism, is done for the readers, is done for your own sake. And maybe, to be honest, another mistake that we did in Turkey as journalists, solidarity. The political climate in Turkey was highly successful and highly skilled to play in every divide and every polarization that was already existing in society. And my suggestion, my heartful suggestion to my all colleagues, that focus on what unites you. Do not let power circles to adopt a structure and to adopt a language, I would say, to manipulate adversaries and the polarization or divides within you. For example, in Turkey now more and more we are coming together in solidarity networks with journalists that we don't necessarily share the same political view, but we necessarily believe that the journalism should be done under free circumstances. And I guess this feeling of solidarity, this feeling of what unites us as a journalist, I think it should be existing everywhere and really shape or combat or fight for the press freedom.
Você acha que vocês estão chegando em uma situação similar a essa, de ter importantes jornalistas turcos que estão cobrindo a Turquia de fora e o que se perde com isso, porque, em geral, a gente faz o movimento contrário, a gente vai até o local dos acontecimentos.
Now, more and more, we have journalists, Turkish journalists, moving abroad. But I wouldn't say that it's on the same level like Iran. But a thing to note about Turkey, and I know that I have told you a very dark story here, but in Turkey, and there is a very good editorial by The Guardian published in February, and it was saying that it's easy to look at Turkey and to see a despot, to see a single man, a one man. But there are millions and millions in Turkey who wants to live otherwise. And I think that we have seen these millions who desire to live otherwise in the constitutional referendum that happened in the April. So according to official the result, 49% of Turkey voted against the presidential system. And of course, that more and more journalists are leaving Turkey, academicians are leaving Turkey. We can even some qualify it as a brain drain. And as you can imagine, a brain drain is very dangerous for a country because it creates a generational effect also. But myself, I can only speak for myself. As a journalist, I'm committed to stay in Turkey, to be based in Turkey, and to show solidarity with my colleagues and to keep up doing my job. So the situation, as an answer to our question, no, it is not the same thing as Iran, but of course there's a trend of moving abroad, and now in Turkey, mostly in Germany, Turkish and Kurdish journalists are setting up news outlets covering Turkey. But Turkish journalists still remain defined, and I think, I don't know how objective it is to say it, but I get a lot of praise from our colleagues abroad that Turkish journalist community showed a very important resilience to fight back and to be united against the threats. So more and more, still under the circumstances, we have new independent news media outlets also opening. So there's still hope, I guess.
Em que momento que começou a se acentuar a censura, a imprensa, a perseguição aos jornalistas na Turquia, que o país deixou de ter liberdade de imprensa com o mainstream media, que você fala, uma mainstream media sólida, como o Brasil ainda tem, e passou a ser esse problema que se tornou o país que mais persegue e prende jornalistas no mundo?
Well, to this question, I will give a very interesting date that mostly people do not think about it. I will say 2008. Because in 2008, the biggest media conglomerate in Turkey had a punishment, a huge tax fine, amounting to million of US dollars. But at the time, people did not react to it so much. Because, for example, Kurdish journalists were angry to this media because they didn't cover the Kurdish politics and the Kurdish civil war in the 90s as they should cover. So starting, I would say, 2008 and mounting to 2016, actually it has developed in stages. It never happened overnight. It was culminating, but we were very slow to react into it. And we failed, and it really saddens me to say that, but we have failed majestically to respond it in the first place and to defend others. And that was one of the most successful, and I see the playbook now everywhere. So the prime minister at the time, Prime Minister Erdogan, was really successful at, for example, attacking some part of the media. He never attacked the media as whole, but he was after, for example, a certain political media. When he targeted that media, the others did not react because they were happy to see it, the other being brought down. So step by step, and very cleverly, he changed the ownership of the media system. So the mainstream news media more and more shifted towards the businessmen who are close to him. But I would say that since, and now looking back in retrospective, it really surprises me to say that since the coming to the coup that in July 2016, before the coup, those were the good days actually, and we didn't know it. After the coup attempt now, under the emergency rule, the press freedom got deteriorated so fast, and now before the coup, we had always like around 50 or 60 journalists in jail, but it skyrocketed. in terms of the journalists in jail, because now in Turkey nowadays everything can be counted as a terrorist propaganda. And whatever you say, any criticism of the current government can be portrayed by the prosecution as another attempt to coup. So the failed coup d'etat changed things enormously in Turkey, and it really just destroyed all the balance. We had some kind of a balance, and we had kinds of, how to say that, some kind of a fighting back, but since the last year, it became so much harder.
As pessoas têm como se informar da realidade ou não tem mais? As pessoas têm a ideia de que elas não estão recebendo mais informação independente, ou é algo que apenas alguns círculos da sociedade sabe que realmente tem essa censura toda e as outras pessoas acham que está normal tudo e que estão tendo acesso à livre informação?
Now, the good part of Turkey, and this is the problem, does not believe in the journalism anymore. So, for example, the circulation numbers of the newspapers, of the remaining newspapers, are dropping down. The ratings of the news channels are just above the bottom. And now in Turkey, in order to get your news, you have to be vigilant, and you have to work hard. And either you are, if you really want to have the real news, either you have to buy remaining independent newspapers. Mostly, that's why the social media is so crucial. Because now we are reduced to social media accounts of the journalists, of the reporters, who are pushing the news. But really, it demands an extra time. And I have a very good friend. She's working in financial sector. She has nothing to do with politics or journalism. The other day, she was telling me, I work hard in my job, and I'm exhausted at night. I really want to find out what's going on, but I don't have the time to dig into the social media accounts of the reporters, dig into some news websites. And another thing that a lot of the news websites are blocked also. And we considered the blockings of the news media websites as a way of the digital attack, also against the free press. So now more and more, and in Turkey now everybody became experts using VPN services. So it really gives you you should be really vigilant, and you should really work on getting the news. And you know what's coming and what has happened? People are so fed up with news. And there is a total apathy, and there is a total frustration with the news that I see a lot of people in Gezi Park protests only 4 years ago. They were strongly engaged in politics. They were following and they were taking a part. Now most of them are like, oh, it's been months that I didn't read a news article. They totally gave up politics, and I find it very alarmingly dangerous because similar to Brazil, in Turkey also we had so many periods of the military juntas, and one of the long-lasting effects of the last coup d'etat in 1980 in Turkey was the depolitization of the youth. And one of the major successes of Gezi in 2013, actually this youth who was totally apolitical, who had nothing to do with the politics, became really politically engaged. It was one of the major successes and the long-lasting effects of Gezi, but now it's totally reversed back. The youth, I would say the generation in their 20s and in their 30s, they totally gave up on Turkey. But I asked the question to myself also a lot of the time, that what keeps me going? Because the stakes are very high. And I have to admit that it's intimidating, and myself also, that's not most of the time, but there are times that I'm really concerned about my own security, that I'm really concerned about my own freedom. But it may seem naive also to say, but I think that I have a duty. And this is a duty that I have to feel. I have to make it happen against my country, against myself. And I think at the end of the day, it is a response that you have to give at yourself, that what did you do? And because regarding from Turkish history, all this past of crackdowns, military juntas, oppression, and persecution, it was coming from other classes, other ruling classes, but they all ended one day. And when they were ended, people were asking to others, what did you do during this time? I think whatever I'm doing as a journalist, as a researcher, as a press freedom activist, that to answer to myself in the first place, what did I do? Did I fight this? And although that I'm concerned much more each day, that this is a risk that I should take and be willing to do what I'm doing.
Os meios de comunicação turcos, tanto os tradicionais quanto os alternativos, eles perceberam a deterioração do Estado de Direito nos últimos 15 anos. Você acredita que foram lenientes ou condescendentes com o regime de Erdogan no início do mandato e no meio do mandato? Existe uma avaliação de erros que se faz hoje por não ter contra-atacado mais cedo e ter deixado que esse monstro crescesse do jeito que ele cresceu?
I will tell a story that 4 years ago I was at the United Nations for a journalism fellowship. I was in New York and I was talking to an American colleague. And at that time in 2013, and comparing now, the crackdown on press freedom was nothing, but still it was alarming. So when we were talking about it and I was telling him the stories, how it goes for the worse, he just stopped a minute and told me, oh, if they try to put so much pressure on you as Turkish journalists, you have to be really strong. Were you really strong? And the truth is, Turkish press was really strong and really independent. In the 90s, each of the major newspaper in Turkey was close to a circulation number close to 1 million. I know that comparing maybe the other countries is not big, but it was 1 million in the 90s, the circulation number. Now it's down to 30,000 for the major news outlets. So there is this huge decay in the traditional press, and Turkish press and the publishers were so independent and they were following their agendas. There were cases in the 90s, they were able to bring down governments with corruption stories. And now we don't have it anymore. So I think the biggest mistake we did, I'm not a publisher myself, I'm not a media owner, of course, and in the very beginning, in the first speech that I made, I emphasized that as a Turkish journalist community, we did some mistakes, but as I would say for the part of the owners and media publishers, when they were cheering to see that the other was attacked, is taken out of business by Erdogan, by the government, they were cheering, oh, less competition. This one is out. But they didn't calculate that they're gonna come for him also. So one by one, we have seen that all the competition erasing and all the media system, all the traditional media system got transferred in the hands of the businessmen close to Erdogan who are chasing government contracts, very lucrative government contracts. So the media owners, I think that from the very early on, they should have been showing much more solidarity and to stay united and to protect each other. But again and again, and the government, the power circus was really successful, was really master level playing into the divides. And that's why that whenever I speak to foreign colleagues, I keep saying that please be careful not to fall into the trap of the polarization. Of course that everybody has their own political convictions and opinions and their own opinionated mindsets. But I think it's very crucial to note that if you are journalists, you have to defend journalism. Not with a political sake, not with a political perspective, but you have to defend the journalism. But I have to make this difference. You have to protect the decent journalism made by your political adversary. Even if you don't believe his or her ideas, his political stance, you have to defend very fiercely his or her journalism. Because if one day they come for him or her and she is taken out, the next day it will be on you. So I think the solidarity and to form a very unified stand is very crucial on this.